All right, welcome back to the PHLY Sixers Podcast. Derek Bodner joined by Kyle Neubeck in what is very clearly the biggest Philadelphia sporting news of the day.
Fly, Eagles, fly. No, I'm not going to do the whole thing. That's it.
Thank God.
I don't have the range for it. Neither does anybody who sings that song normally. But when it's just me singing, you can tell.
I'm not sure the point of the song is really to showcase range. But,
no, I agree.
Yeah. As all of you are getting ready for tonight's Eagles game, and some of you, hopefully many of you, going down to Tradesman tonight for our watch party, Kyle and I will be talking about the 15th roster spot.
Love that.
We have all indicated that we largely expect the Sixers to not sign anyone with that spot. So I'm doing the thing that Kyle hates the most, saying that what we are about to talk about.
Crushing the show right as it starts. Derek's specialty.
But we have mentioned that repeatedly over the last month or so. So I'm not exactly spoiling anything with that. I guess, would you like to start off talking about the Sixers, talking about tonight's game? Where would you like to start?
Well, let's start with what's our jobs, and then we'll leave the birds to the end and also to the
That's
experts.
Fair enough.
So I would say to you, because you've brought up, we've said this on the show many times, we don't believe the 15th roster spot will be used. Can you give sort of a brief explanation to the listeners, the watchers, why we believe that's the case from a CBA salary cap standpoint?
So the reason that the team always gives is that they say they are preserving roster flexibility, which is for the most part nonsense. In previous years, it was a nice way of saying we don't want to sign someone that we might have to just end up cut and waste money and waste tax dollars doing so and waste space.
Oh, we're going to talk about some tax dollars
tax.
On this show, baby.
It's a little different now that the aprons are involved. Now, the Sixers are over the first apron right now. They're about, I think, $6 million or so under the second apron, in space under the second apron, somewhere in that range. So it has a little more tooth to it that it's not just, because basically, like, their argument is we might want to make a lopsided trade in the future. We want to keep that roster spot open. In reality, if you sign someone to a minimum contract, you can just waive them when need be to clear that roster spot. Roster flexibility isn't really the thing. It's financial flexibility. It's salary, it's luxury tax savings and whatnot. Space under the luxury tax. You don't have to eat into that guaranteed money to make a move. So in the past, it was mostly about Josh Harris's wallet, which I have pretty famously said I don't really care about.
We still don't care about Josh Harris's wallet, to be clear.
Understand why he cares about it, and if that's priority, you understand why Daryl cares about it, because that is his boss. But now there's a little more tooth to it because, like I said, there is that second apron. You don't want to be wasting money under that. You want to preserve some flexibility. So I get it a little more this year. I would say they weren't going to sign anyone with that 15th roster spot regardless, even if we were under the old CBA because of those luxury tax reasons I was talking about. But now there's that second layer because of the apron. So again, Daryl has historically liked to keep that 15th roster spot open. I think their argument is this is a player who probably wasn't going to be in the rotation anyway. If you relied on him, you're in pretty bad shape. And they've always liked to preserve that flexibility, which again is mostly financial.
Yeah, and it's much tougher to make that point from the case of, oh, well, if they need to make a trade, maybe they're the team that's bringing on multiple guys or more guys than the other team, when they are set up structurally they're the team consolidating players and contracts to get a guy, right? Like, it doesn't really behoove them to swap one guy for two guys in this sense, right? They need, what they're hoping for if they make a trade at the deadline is you turn KJ Martin, maybe another guy who's not a consequential rotation guy, and some picks into a top 7 player, top 8 player on your roster, and you strengthen your playoff rotation. What you're not needing or trying to do is saying, hey, we really need that 14th and 15th spot on the roster. We really need to juice that up. So let's flip one guy for two guys. And so I think you can make the case that they should sign a 15th guy just from a pure, like, hey, there are some skill needs and roster holes that they potentially have that you could give somebody a look to start the season. But as always, I have to lean on Derek to tell me why the math says don't do that, or maybe not don't do that, but indicates take a step back and think about it for a second.
Oh, buddy, over the last month, we have certainly learned that you can be the math guy too. Do not sell yourself short.
Fun fact, I actually got a higher score on the math part of the SATs than anything else.
This is going to shock absolutely nobody, but so did I.
I can't believe it. No way. Mine was by 10 points, so it was like dead even on everything.
It was pretty close.
But, yeah.
It was also a long time ago, and I don't 100% remember. But yeah, and like I said, the luxury tax, or not the luxury tax, collective bargaining agreement, it's not even so much really math as it is just memorizing arcane rules that is, I have spent way too much of my adult life doing. I guess...
As I say, all that out of the way, let's talk about basketball players.
So I guess before we even start off talking about names, what do you think in terms of like positional need or skill set need you would be shooting for?
So ideal world, it would be somebody in that mold we talked about with Bobby Portis yesterday, where it's somebody who can help with rebounding, who can space the floor, who can play in the front court and be kind of a dirty work type of player. The issue at this point is there are not really guys out there who do even one of those things, let alone all of them at the same time. You are more than likely, you might get a shooter, but you're not getting a shooter who rebounds. You might get a rebounder, but you're not getting a rebounder who shoots. And you're definitely not getting a guy who can do one of those things and can take guys off the dribble and can play make for others. And so this is where I look at it as best player available. Although I would say one archetype that I'm interested in is bigger shooter, like a guy with size who can shoot the ball, because a lot of their shooting right now is in the backcourt and with smaller players. And so I think that limits your lineup flexibility a little bit. So we'll talk about some bigger shooters, I would assume, at some point, but I think we should start with the guy who's the cover graphic for the show, and that's old friend, the guy who certainly doesn't know how to shoot from three anymore, unfortunately. Number 1 overall pick, Markelle Fultz, most recently of the Orlando Magic, who was just kind of sitting out there in free agency. And I don't know where he fits on this team. I don't know where he fits in the NBA in general, because obviously, when they made the pick, they were expecting a very different type of player. I think Orlando probably still thought at that point they might be able to turn him, if not into prospect coming out of Washington, Markelle Fultz, at least something trending in that direction. But he has become a backup ball handler who does not shoot threes, but has, pretty good to very good at times playmaking talent, who also is a capable defender who I think can be, I want to say like a 3-position defender. Like I think he can get up to some threes, not the biggest and burliest wings, but I think certainly both backcourt spots and some threes. And when you give me that type of defensive versatility, flexibility, and a guy who can also play make, can also take guys off the dribble, who does still, in spite of the 3-point shot, have a functional mid-range game.
He has a little bit of the Hezzy pull-up Jimbo.
Yeah. Man, what a throwback. That was KD who tweeted that initially, right? So he does still have that. Some of the big concerns with him are the health stuff, right? Like he's had some major injuries, and then he's also had a lot of nagging stuff over the last couple of years. Those are smaller concerns if you're signing him to be a 15th guy than when you hand him $50 million over several years like the Magic did. And so to me, I think he's the most versatile player that's left on the free agent market. I don't think he necessarily solves any one problem for the Sixers. He's a good rebounder for a guard, but you do have to say it's for a guard, right? He's not someone you're putting in the front court next to Joel. You do have to look at lineup construction stuff, right? Like I don't think he can play with Andre Drummond at all, because I think that is such a spacing disaster that even if the other 3 guys are lights out shooters, you are going to be facing a packed paint every night or every time those 2 are on the floor together. That being said, I believe in the overall skill package enough that to me, he's the most intriguing guy left. If you just want to say, let's take a talent swing. He's 26 years old. He was still liked here in spite of the fact that he had all those public struggles. And I mean that obviously with the fans gave him great support, But the organization too, everyone in the organization at the time was like, look, we really like the kid. It's not, they didn't view it as like, oh, it's his fault that things went completely left for him. They believed in him as a worker, so on and so forth. So maybe you could sell it as like, hey, this is a great story. He gets to come back to where his NBA career started and maybe rehab himself, give himself a better opportunity down the line. I don't suspect it'll happen, but he's one of the more interesting guys that's left for me.
Yeah. And to your point about defensive versatility, he came out and remember he was, 6'3", but he had a 6'10" wingspan, 6'9", 6'10" wingspan. I certainly think he can defend ones and twos like you mentioned. I think there are probably a fair number of threes he can hold up against as well. That is very much not the concern with him. It was offensively. And you mentioned that the pull-up jumper is there at times.
It's serviceable. It's certainly not a weapon
and
the
it's
way
certainly
we thought
not
it
was
be.
at Washington.
Yeah.
And look, it's just, and I mean, he's still a really great athlete and a guy who can get to the rim and has really good body control. He was one of those guys that I made the case. A lot of times we focus on athlete like vertical pop and we ignore things like body control, like being able to contort yourself around the rim. And he has a little bit of both of that. And you combine that with the defensive pressure he can put. It's just, I don't want to really go too deep into this because it could get depressing because now I'm going back to how I scouted him in that draft and at Washington. And there's just so much to like. There's so much to like. But that jumper on this team would be tough. That being said, it is a completely different argument when you're talking about the 15th roster spot and a minimum contract. Quite frankly, I thought there was a chance he would get someone to give him, I don't want to say like a real contract, but more than the minimum, a portion of a mid-level. Just because he's so young and he's still got a lot of the athleticism, even though the injuries have taken some toll. And I thought someone was going to be like, all right, we're going to get him into our program, so to speak, and see whether or not we can make any headway that two organizations now have not really been able to. Although he is a better shooter now than when he left the Sixers. Like that mid-range improvement is real. It's, again, not necessarily where it needs to be, especially if he's going to be a player without a three-point range. But it's a lot better than it was when he was here. You could certainly talk me into taking a flyer. And then when we were going over what would be our priorities with this 15th spot, that 4-5 is probably number one. Wings to me supersede everything. Like if you can ever get a wing, you take it. The problem is wings are in such high demand right now and there's such low supply. When you can get them on a minimum, it's unlikely. Now I say this and I full well know that there's a guy in the description of this show who the Sixers got last year right around this time in Kelly Oubre and ended up working out. That being said, it's very rare. Those players are very heavily pursued. So I'm almost crossing a wing off the list just because it doesn't seem all that realistic. A bigger guard who could theoretically play next to Maxey is, intriguing, but he has to shoot.
Yeah.
That being said, again, would I enjoy it a little bit? Yeah. And he does bring it up defensively that I'd be interested in, and he can get spots off the dribble. But man, that jumper would be tough to live through.
It's really ugly. And to your point about Kelly, the circumstances there were pretty special, I think, right? It's rare that a guy is capable of scoring 20 points a game and then the next year there's no market other than a minimum for his services. And so some of that was the league had painted Kelly as, well, this guy is just an empty calories player. He had the experience in Golden State where they brought him in to be one of the cogs in the machine there. And Kelly, whether because he couldn't or I think it's more because he wasn't ready to be in this role, he didn't fit in with Golden State at all. And so then he goes to Charlotte and, puts up numbers and teams are like, well, that's all he wants to be. And so last year was a really important year for Kelly to be like, no, I can be just a part of the system. I can buy in. I can change my stripes to a degree and frankly show a level of play-to-play commitment defensively that he hadn't shown prior. There are not a lot of guys like that in the league who have that type of talent, who are like lottery level picks, who fall out of favor, that in their late 20s all of a sudden discover like, okay, I got to get my act together. I got to focus on different things, prioritize different things. That was a major success story. So anyone who's expecting a September signing of any player, let alone a wing who's got his type of tools and pedigree is what you would say, you would be hard pressed to get that. So Markelle is one of the few guys I think that's actually on the market that you could sell yourself on that, right? Like he was a number 1 overall pick. We all know what happened afterward, but has that type of
Except
talent.
we don't really know what happened afterward.
Well, yeah, I suppose that's true. We know some of what happened, and some of it is stuff that's never going to be discussed on this show. But yeah, I think Markelle is one of the few guys that has that like upper echelon level talent for a guy who's still a free agent. And I think if you squint just hard enough, you can say, look, he brings real playmaking skill if he's able to get to his spots and do things. But how do you maximize it is kind of the thing with him, because I don't want him playing with Andre Drummond. Frankly, I want him playing with Joel Embiid even less, right? Because when Joel's on the floor, that's when you got to win minutes handily. That's when you're winning games and you're putting your best backup lineups you can around him. I think playing with a Joel type player is certainly best for Markelle Fultz, but I don't think the reverse is true. Now, I do think Markelle would be comfortable in that pick and roll setup, hitting him on the pocket pass, getting him to the ball at the elbows, all that. But he can't also do the things that you want, where it's the dribble handoffs at the free throw line extended and whatnot. So it'd be tough, but I would be willing to consider it. Again, we know it's kind of a moot point. They're not going to use this roster spot, but he is, to me, if you just look at all the names left in the pool, he's one of a very short list of guys that I would say, yeah, if you're going to take a swing, take a big one, because otherwise I would agree, just keep the flexibility and keep it moving.
Yeah. And Kelly was a little bit unique also because he had a more substantial deal earlier on in the offseason, which his agent, basically talked him into turning down. Kelly eventually fired that agent. That agent also happens to be related to somebody else that we won't necessarily talk about right now. So mistakes were made to make Kelly available at that point. And the Sixers benefited from that. So that's not saying that another player and another agent couldn't have made similar mistakes, but it was a little bit of a unique situation.
I mean, look, we didn't think Lonnie Walker would be taking an Exhibit 10.
No, and if Lonnie was still available, he would have highlighted the show.
He would have been the face of this program, I would say.
Yes. Think of the mistake you made, Lonnie. Not only did you join that evil empire, but you could have been the face of this show.
Wow, what an honor for us.
All right. I think before we get to the next in our list, we should take a minute to talk about some of our sponsors. First up, we want to tell you about Rite Aid because it's still fall allergy season. Fall allergies can begin as early as August and last into November. The main culprits are ragweed and mold, with other possible allergens including plants and dust mites, and then pet dander and fur are also possibilities. Allergic reactions occur when your body misidentifies a substance such as pollen as harmful to the body, and then your immune system releases histamines to fight off the allergens. These same histamines are also the cause of your allergy symptoms, such as a runny nose, itchy or watery eyes, or wheezing. That's why antihistamines, medication that suppress the amount of histamine in your body, are often the first line of defense to treating your allergy symptoms. Here's what you can do to get relief during allergy season. Sign up for Rite Aid Rewards emails at riteaid.com/rewards to receive email pollen alerts for your area. Use a dehumidifier, shower frequently, especially at night after you've been out all day. Check pollen counts on your weather app of choice and keep windows closed and use an air conditioner. And then here are some over-the-counter options which are available at your local Rite Aid. A nasal rinse to help flush out your nasal passages. When symptoms flare up, try the antihistamines we talked about earlier. And in order to be proactive, 1 to 2 weeks before pollen allergies are expected to be high, try a nasal corticosteroid. If that's still not enough relief, you can always ask your Rite Aid pharmacist for recommendations on ways to get relief during allergy season. We also want to make sure we tell you about Empire today. I have mentioned time and time again that home improvement projects are things that I put off. A big reason I put that off is because they look daunting and I know my limitations. So when you need something to make that task just a little bit more manageable, and if flooring is something on your to-do list, Empire Today is the place that you want to turn to. With Empire Today, you get shop-at-home convenience, the right product for your needs, quick and professional installation, and a price match guarantee. Empire Today keeps shopping for floors simple with a curated product selection. Their philosophy is to help you find what you need, not to overwhelm you with thousands of choices and substitutes. What they leave out of their selection is as important as what they put in. Empire's product team exhaustively combs through thousands of product samples each year to find the perfect styles. And Empire Today has a very handy virtual floor designer, which is a great way to see how new floors will look in any space. It's easy, just snap a picture and instantly see how new floors will look in your room. Shopping for floors at a big box store can be frustrating. You might talk to someone today who was working in plumbing yesterday. Flooring is all Empire Today does. They live and breathe flooring, so you can be confident you're getting honest, upfront advice. And they also service their own warranties. With Empire Today, you won't have to track down a manufacturer's phone number. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can receive a $350 off discount when they use the promo code PHLY.
That's a nice discount.
Restrictions apply. See EmpireToday.com/PHLY for details.
I can still hear that old Empire
Yes.
jingle in my head.
Really should. It would be great if we could get permission to have that playing as a background to that ad read.
There are some days that I wish that I was musically inclined and I would just be a jingle guy. Like there's, I feel like you could make a fortune just being like, I'm the guy who made. This is, if anyone wants a snapshot of what it's like to live in my brain, that thought in my head just led me to, I saw a TikTok recently. You played GoldenEye 64 at some point in your life, right? There is a TikTok where it's a guy who's talking to himself, but he's supposed to be talking to another Nintendo employee where he's like, hey, so we have you working on the pause music for a movie tie-in video game. And it's just the pause music. It's not a big deal. And the guy turns and he goes, oh yeah, listen to this. And he plays when the watch is out on the pause during GoldenEye, and the guy is like blown away by it. It's one of my favorite things I've seen recently. So yeah, this is Beautiful Mind segment with Kyle Neubeck going from Empire Today to professional jingles to GoldenEye 64.
All right, we're going to give you a hypothetical. Back to basketball. Ben Simmons gets bought out. Markelle on a minimum or Ben Simmons on a minimum?
Markelle. Well,
just because Ben's more annoying?
Yeah. And I think, so here's the thing. I think the thing with Markelle is you would bring him in, and because he had such a tumultuous tenure here and didn't produce a lot, the expectations would be low. Yes. And so I don't think people would come in being like, oh man, Markelle Fultz going to come and be an all-star. I think there would still be a lot of delusioned people
they would expect
who look at Ben and are like, oh, he just needs the right team and personnel around him, and Simmons and shooters, they can play small ball. And there's still a contingent of people in Brooklyn, in Philadelphia, and elsewhere who believe that Ben Simmons has been wronged by everyone else and nothing is his fault and nothing. And look, he has had trouble that's related to health that I wouldn't blame Ben for that, certainly. But the expectations would be too high for a guy that would come in and be a back of the bench type of player. I prefer guys, if you're using the 15th roster spot, someone who's going to fit in a little bit rather than be the Simo the Savage type guy coming in here. So I'd take Markelle over him and say that. It's not exactly a ringing endorsement of either player, I would say.
Yeah, I agree.
So who's on your list of the guys that are out there that you would consider for one of these spots?
I don't believe he has signed, but what about Jordan Nwora?
That's a good one.
Good size.
Good name. Can
shoot, although he's struggled the past couple of years, but has had seasons where he could shoot. I think he's capable of being I don't want to say good defender, but at least a guy who can hold his own. It's frequently not the case, I feel like, but I think he at least has the physical tools where you can get him to buy in, and maybe if he's on a prove it type of deal. And, last year his shooting numbers weren't great, but he was playing on the Raptors who, didn't exactly really have a functional offense at that point. So I think there's some reason to believe he can get back to the high 30s, low 40s shooting. And if you give me the size at 6'8" and the ability to shoot, I think at the 15th roster spot for minimum contract, I think that's a name that I think is on my list.
I need to figure out what happened last year with the shooting, because in Milwaukee, I guess he had his second year, he didn't shoot that well, but he had 2 years where, albeit on low volume, he shot the lights out. Yep. He shot like 45% his rookie year, shot almost 41% his third year. And then he leaves Milwaukee, goes to Indiana, and the tail end of his first year in Indiana, granted it's 24 games, he shot really well on even higher volume. And then last year just went completely off a cliff. So
still 37% on like 600 attempts for his career.
Yeah.
Not high volume and like on a game or a per minute basis, but enough where I think you can believe in the shot.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised that he's still out there, I guess, because I think he's probably a minimum deal for him is probably fair because he is a fairly limited player. But again, in theory, switchable defender, guy who can shoot a little bit, although last year, jury is out. He's not going to play make for others, but I think the ship has sailed on the Sixers getting almost anybody who can play make for others.
If they could shoot, defend, and play make, they're not going to be a minimum player.
Yeah, so if
Kelly only really checks one of those boxes, and that's defend.
If you wanted to, he's what, like 6'8", I think?
Yeah.
6'7", 6'8". So a guy with size who can potentially shoot. I have another guy I would bet on first just because I think the shooting track record is more significant, but I think Jordan Nwora is a good shout. Who do you think the guy is I'm referring to? I'll give you a hint.
Okay.
He was a favorite of people who did not want to draft Dario Saric.
Oh, Dougie McBuckets.
Doug McBuckets, man. He's so certainly not someone you wanted as
if this was Jeopardy, I would have been like, Kyle, that hit made it too easy.
Well, Sixers Jeopardy, when we played it, I really hammered you guys with some of those questions.
Well, except for when you were like, here's a jersey number, and I'm like, nope, I have no idea. But no, I guess because McDermott was a decade ago, like I guess some people could have forgotten that.
Yeah, well, I think Ed Rendell wanted to shout out Ed Rendell wanted to draft Doug McDermott.
He was really
over
pissed
Dar.
off.
He was like the Doug McDermott fan. Yeah. No, he's not the only one. That's just the one I remember because of
Doug was a really good college player. Like,
yes.
I get it.
So Doug McDermott, you're getting one thing, and that's shooting. And I think he has shown since leaving college, he's been able to expand his shooting repertoire a bit, right? Like I think he turned into more of a pure movement shooter and became comfortable in that role, did not need the ball all that often, where some of the skepticism for him coming in was he was the guy, but he was also super old and all he did was shoot. And so if it's a guy who gets the ball taken out of his hands, how does he function? He struggles to shoot his first year in Chicago, granted in limited games. I don't remember if that was due to injury or if he was just out of the rotation, whatever. But since then, has shot pretty consistently low 40s, high 30s on low volume, but good bench volume, right? And I think he's a guy who, if you get a movement shooter in here, I'm on board with that. He's not especially big. I think he's more, if Jordan Nwora is like 6'8", he's probably in the 6'6", 6'5". Maybe I'm underselling him a little bit, but he's not. He's also, on top of that, Nwora has some defensive upside. Doug McDermott, not a good defender in almost any way. In fact, I would say he probably, when we were talking about Dalton Connect and the type of concerns you have with him defensively at the next level and talking about why he slid in the draft, not to stereotype every white guy shooter, but pretty similar concerns, right? Like the side-to-side movement isn't great. The off-ball awareness, not the best in the world. But I think McDermott's shooting has been a real deal bankable skill for every year except for his rookie year with the Bulls. And so for that, I would say he can still shoot. If you want another shooter at the end of the bench, be worse ones to have than McDermott, who also has, not like you've ever heard anything bad about him as a locker room guy. And I do think when you're talking about 15th roster spot, it's important that you just have good guys. Like brought it up with Markelle, good character guy, well-liked in the locker room. I think the same is true of McDermott. I don't know about Jordan Nwora, so I can't speak to that. But I think when it's a guy who's not going to play a lot, you want somebody who's going to ferociously wave the towel, celebrate the brickin' for chicken, the frosty freeze out, whatever it might be during a game, because odds are most nights that's your most important role on the team and not what you offer on the floor.
Yeah. And, McDermott for his career, 41% three-point shooter on nearly 2,300 attempts.
Yeah.
Half of his shots just about come from beyond the three-point line. So you know what he is going to do. And I do. He's low volume in the sense that he doesn't take many per game, but on a per minute basis, I think he takes nearly the past couple of years, he's up at 8, 9, 10 per.
He was at almost 10 a game his final stretch of the season with Indiana.
So I think he can scale up and be a high
per
volume.
36, I should say.
I think he can scale up and be a high volume in terms of like per minute, per possession shooter. And I have a bias for players who can do that because I think, especially on this team, and surrounding Maxey and Embiid, that really, really helps unstick an offense. It might also be a little bit of PTSD after watching the player who shall not be named the past couple of years, that like guys who just let it fly, I have a predisposition for.
I know who you're talking about now. Who we got yelled at for bringing up yesterday.
Look, we're trying to rectify our mistakes here. We're learning personal growth. He wouldn't be at the top of my list just because I think there's a 0% chance he can hang defensively in the playoffs, but we're talking about a 15th roster spot. You are talking about a little bit of an innings eater in the regular season. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think he can certainly help space the floor.
And if you compare him to, say, another guy who's out there, like a Landry Shamet, for example. Landry is younger, but I think Landry has been he's a much more easily targeted defender because of the size issues there.
Right.
And he also has not exactly been, I'd have to double check on the numbers there, but I don't think he's actually been a consistently good shooter. I think he's had stretches, certainly, but Landry's at 38.4% for his career. And a lot of that is the front half. The last few years, 36.8, 37.7, 33.8 last year in Washington. Now I would say that Washington number is depressed by the terrible team environment, right? You're playing off of Kuzma, you're playing off of Jordan Poole. There's only so much my guy Tyus Jones can do to uplift everybody in the organization. So I think Landry might be, I think he's probably, not might be, he is better than last year's numbers, say. But if you're saying we're getting an end-of-bench shooter and you're asking me to choose between McDermott and Shamet, I would take McDermott because I think his shooting is more resilient. He's played on a ton of different teams and across a ton of different type of team contexts, and he shot the ball well everywhere he's gone, whereas Landry has been kind of a roller coaster. And so if you're assuming that you're going to have defensive issues with either one, no matter who you sign, I would take Dougie McBuckets, baby.
There is something to Landry's relative youth. He's not young in terms of like a prospect.
Oh yeah, he's
anymore,
like 5 years younger than McDermott. I think.
Just the fact that like we know his skill set plays well off of Joel Embiid and that off-ball movement, which he can do, plays well off of Joel Embiid. So you can make the case that maybe this would be the right environment for him. But yeah, certainly McDermott has a much more proven track record. Agreed.
All right. Well, maybe we'll come back and talk about some more, do some Remember Some Guys segments. Or maybe I'll come back and yell about a local cable company for a little bit.
Just dudes
you never know. Until then,
names.
We have to tell you about a couple of our friends. First of which, guys, you can see I'm wearing the Eagles sweatshirt. Stressful Birds game coming up tonight. Might be screaming at the TV along with friends of mine. You might be at our event that we're going to tell you about in a second at Tradesman's, yelling, screaming, upset about Sirianni, Jalen Hurts, Saquon Barkley, whoever it might be. But guys, there's always a better way. There is a chiller way. And once you choose chill, reach for an ice cold Coors Light. And with Coors Light, you know you're getting an ice cold beer when the mountains turn blue, when the bottles and cans, right when they hit that perfect temperature. All your stress melted away during the summertime, but the dang football is back to bring heart attacks to your home every single Sunday. Guys, every game feels like the Super Bowl around here, and I love that passion, but it's not always good for your stress levels and your blood pressure. So I want to remind you, before week 1, before this big Brazil game, you can always choose chill. And then once you've recentered yourself, get that cold layered, cold filtered, cold packaged Coors Light with a smooth finish for some mountain cold refreshment in the middle of a game that we will endorse, except for any time they play Denver, because then it's, we're at odds with that mountain cold type of thing. So when you choose to rise above it all, choose chill, choose Coors Light, get Coors Light delivered straight to your door with Instacart by going to CoorsLight.com/PHLY basketball. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado. And as I mentioned, guys, we've brought it up a lot on the show, but we do have our PHLY Eagles watch party and live show at Tradesman's tonight. 7 p.m. sharp is when the festivities begin. Eagles versus Packers in Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's a $40 ticket, and it includes an all-you-can-eat buffet that includes chicken tenders, mac and cheese, pulled pork sliders, waffle fries, and pretzel bites. You get 3 drink tickets. There are cans available. There's Yards Brawler on draft or well drinks. Eagles versus Browns ticket giveaway is the big one. You have to buy the ticket on our events tab at allphly.com to be eligible for that ticket giveaway. So go to allphly.com/events if you want a ticket to get that drink ticket, the all you can eat, and the chance to get a giveaway. There are further events coming up soon for the Phillies, for the Eagles. We probably will have some later on, although that's not coming yet. Until then, if you're on allphly.com already, looking at the events tab, looking to buy tickets for different things, you can sign up and be a diehard member. You get access to our exclusive Discord community where Derek and I, in addition to everybody else here that's involved with PHLY, interact with you guys about all the local sports teams. But much more than that, right? We have a TV channel. We have a video game channel. We had created one just for the Olympics, separate from all this. Every time there's a big event or something that people want to come together and talk about, that's there for you to use. And oh, by the way, you get premium written content. You get a free shirt or a hat when you become a member. There's a ton of stuff you get for being a diehard with PHLY here. So go to allphly.com, become a diehard today. Join the growing number of people who have. I know Val recently did. She's popped up in the Discord from time to time. There are other. Michael B has popped up in the Discord. We've been having spirited discussions about this arena proposal and, you know, all the things that stem from that. And I have found as certain social media platforms have become less usable, having this community of our people, that it's like a nice just group of people that we can argue a little bit, but it's all in good spirit and good faith. I enjoy it quite a bit.
I don't know what you're talking about. Twitter is a stress-free place to hang out and have rational discourse.
Yeah, that must be why it's allowed to be used in Brazil, the country that the game is being played in tonight. So do we want to do a quick pivot to the Comcast thing?
By the way,
arena thing?
Follow Z-Berm on Threads for reasons completely related to what we were just talking about.
There you go.
If you want to riff on the arena for a couple minutes.
Okay, so there's
Kyle's our arena correspondent.
There was a quick story in the Inquirer today, I believe it was this morning, let's say, about a provision in the proposal the Sixers have made for the arena. So I'm going to share the relevant text from this article. Quote, the team is requesting its deal with the city include a provision that could allow the Sixers to receive a local taxpayer backing in the future, according to a person with knowledge of the negotiations. The provision would apply only in the event that the city subsidizes a different Philly sports facility after the proposed basketball arena gets approved. So then the follow-up, Councilman Squilla, who he is part of his district, is that Market East district that the arena would be in. So he said, if they commit to no city dollars and another arena gets built, the Sixers would get the same thing. If Comcast, for example, wants to build a new arena and they say we need $200 million, if the city gives them $200 million, you have to go back and give the Sixers $200 million. And so this was taken a number of ways by different people, right? I think the anti-arena people have said, well, look, they actually want taxpayer money. They've been lying the whole time. What I think it actually says is they're trying to block Comcast from getting funding moving forward. The Sixers, and I would say this is backed up by the local and state politicians who at this point have said, the Sixers have not asked us for money. We will not give them money. And we believe they are staying in Philadelphia. That communicates to me the Sixers aren't asking for money.
Right. If their goal was to get taxpayer dollars, they wouldn't sit around and wait for another competitor to enter the space for them to get taxpayer dollars.
Comcast, on the other hand, they have commented publicly, and as they've talked about these supposed plans that they want to put into motion, have said, well, that's where some public money might have to come in. And they've made it fairly clear that they're going to need some form of public subsidy, whether it's for public transport, some other piece of that with the zoning and the parking lots down in South Philly. They will need it. So what it amounts to is the Sixers looking at Comcast and saying, if you're going to try to block our arena, what we're going to do with our proposal is try to block you from getting any sort of funding when you eventually need an arena. And I think it's pretty smart on multiple levels. One, Comcast has used this exact sort of provision in their cable deals for a long time. In fact, I had someone reach out to me that's in, let's say, the broader cable industry that said, look into these deals and search it through Comcast. Comcast is actually notorious for using what it's called as a most favored nation contract, where they have this sort of arrangement where if some other company comes in, they're able to get the same, or in many cases, better benefits because they were the first mover somewhere. The FCC has actually made inquiries into this practice and at times has tried to ban them and ban Comcast specifically from using them because they've been challenged on monopoly levels several times over. So that's number one. Number two, I think it's smart from the Sixers because they're boxing Comcast in to some degree. They're saying, okay, your pitch to the city and what you're saying to us is the Wells Fargo Center is good enough and that we should be happy enough to be tenants. If that's not the case, then we have grounds to build our arena and move on to a new home that we think is more suitable. And then on top of that, if you have to concede that, then you're going to have to spend that taxpayer money in South Philadelphia and ask for money from the city that we're not asking for to build our proposal in Chinatown, or not in Chinatown, in Market East, neighboring to Chinatown. So I think what is becoming clear to me, and I've said this in our Discord, I've said it in some degree on Twitter and other platforms, this is not about Chinatown or anything else anymore as it relates to what is actually happening behind the scenes. People who are covering this at the politics level, at the state level, talking to the people like the governor, state representatives, talking to people like Councilman Squilla, Mayor Parker, other people involved with all these, negotiations and proposals, have made it pretty clear that this is just the Sixers versus Comcast. And as I've said already, I'm always reluctant to take the Sixers side on anything. But if you're going to ask me to take their side against Comcast, I will take their side, take almost anyone's side against the evil monopoly that is Comcast in Philadelphia.
Yeah, it would be incredible for Comcast to try to talk about anti-competitive practices when they're freaking Comcast. Yes. Like, that would be the most hypocritical thing in the world. That would be like me yelling at you for being a numbers guy. Like, come on.
Well, it's just like, the whole thing is just comical that they're all of a sudden they have this biomedical proposal and it's not authentic. None of this is what's been pointed out many times to me, that you can go back and look at the renderings. Comcast has been saying we're going to do this in South Philly for 20 years. If you look at the original proposal at what became Xfinity Live, it was this huge, expansive project. It was like, Xfinity Live is just the first piece. 20 years later or 15 years later, whatever it is, it's still just Xfinity Live and a bunch of parking lots. And so there's nothing to suggest they actually want to do anything until it doesn't have to be the Sixers. It just is the Sixers in this case. Until the Sixers are putting their feet to the fire and saying, we're not happy here. We don't want to pay rent and we want to build a new arena. And all of a sudden, hey, we could build this great complex in South Philadelphia. Well, why didn't you do it before? And in fact, 15 years ago or 13 years ago, when Ed Snyder sold the team, you had $300 million to use to potentially upgrade the area around the arena to build Xfinity Live out into more of an entertainment complex. So I just don't know how they can look people in the eye and pretend like this is an above board process. But that's just kind of how it goes around here.
Cannot wait until this gets resolved. It's a priority for the fall docket, right?
Yeah, well, so all the reporting around this, and it lines up with what I've heard talking to people on the Sixers end, is that, the Sixers don't have, I have not been given here's the drop dead date for this needs to be done, but they have highlighted September as a really important, mid-September as a very important stretch to, at minimum, get it introduced. And then Councilman Squilla, as I said the other day, was on WHYY and said, once it gets introduced, it'd be the month to review it, and then you probably vote on it, let's say by mid-October, if it's introduced by then. So the hope would be that it gets resolved and that we'll at least have some finality one way or another. Right. I still continue to root against the idea of going to Jersey for the Philadelphia 76ers game. But
my only request is to resolve this by the time that the regular season starts so that I don't have to take time out of our day when we should be talking about basketball to talk about politicians and arenas.
Yeah, the whole thing is, and look, I don't want it to come off as like, oh man, I'm so gung-ho in support of the Sixers billionaire over the other ones. The whole thing is, at the end of the day, it's all about people wanting to make more money. I don't have the same reverence for the South Philly parking lot complex that a lot of other people do, but I, as a media member, I have a different relationship with the team I cover than people watching the show and people who are paying to go to games. So I understand that's a thorny issue. The thing I get a kick out of are the Flyers diehards who are like, well, just move them to South Jersey. Who cares? They don't deserve to be there anyway. One, the Flyers are in like the bottom third of all North American sports organizations in the last 5 years, where the Sixers are in like the top 8 to 10 teams in terms of winning. Number two, the Flyers have been in Voorhees for much longer than the Sixers have been in Camden. So if you're going to say anybody should move over the bridge and get them the heck out of here, it's the Flyers, who they already have basically a community there. Because unlike the Sixers practice facility, the skate zone in Voorhees is at least like kind of a mixed use sort of deal. So yeah, I don't know. The whole thing is just, it's a big pissing contest, which I don't really appreciate.
Yep. And I don't, like you mentioned, I don't care which billionaire has their portfolio increased a little bit. I just want a usable arena that's convenient to get to and doesn't displace too many people or businesses. I guess we'll see. Hopefully we'll get a resolution on that soon, or at least a little more direction on that soon. Any other names you wanted to bring up here before we close out this segment?
Now back to basketball once again. There's just not a lot of guys who are out there Cedi Osman, maybe. I think he fits the bill of, if you're looking for somebody that's kind of multi-talented offensively, although not really. He's had, what did he shoot last year? Now I got to look it up I was so in my Comcast bag that
if you would like to continue ranting about Comcast, please do.
So last couple of years, he shot the ball well. Shot 37% last year, almost 39, or 37% 2 years ago in Cleveland, almost 39% on the Spurs last year. Played 70 plus games, so not exactly a limited sample size there. And in both of those instances, he's playing in front court dominant teams. And so his role was mostly, you're a spot up guy. And so if you can get a guy who's a 6'7"-ish, like pretty prototypical small forward size, at least height wise, who can shoot the ball a little bit, I don't think that's a crazy use of resources. I think Cedi's a decent enough player. I just don't think he's really going to do anything else. Right. I think, again, not to harp on this too hard. We don't want to be like, boy, these guys all stink and can only do one thing. But generally, if you get to September as a free agent, you're not going to be a multi-dimensional player. I don't think Cedi is an especially good defender. I don't think he's horrible either. I think he's probably in the middle of the band as far as that goes. But yeah, he's one of the biggest names left. That says a lot about the state of the market where we're at. Like, are they going to sign 35-year-old Markieff Morris?
Well, that's what
probably not
going to say. Players like Justin Holiday or Morris that you mentioned.
Reggie Bullock, I think, is toast at this point. Yep. I think Reggie Bullock, like 3 years ago, I would have loved to have on the team. Reggie Bullock 3 years ago is not signing a minimum deal in September. Yep. So that's the problem with him.
Jay Crowder, another one, just aged out of usefulness.
He's pretty cooked.
Yep.
Here's one that everyone here knows him well. Robert Covington.
If he has any knees left.
And that's the thing, right? We were waiting almost the entire second half of last season. Oh, when's Cov coming back? When's Cov coming back? And everyone was kind of like, for a while. And then with maybe like a month to go in the season, it was like, I'd be shocked to see him again this year. And that to me says a lot about where his health at. And I wish that wasn't the case, but it certainly seems like he just is not going to be fit enough to play a consistent NBA role anymore. Because he does fit that, can shoot the ball and is a good rebounder for his position.
And could defend. Even if you could just get the Covington that you got, the month or so he was able to play, a month or two that he was able to play last year after the trade, I would take that back on the 15th roster spot in a second. Just not convinced that he's going to be on the court with any kind of consistency. And I think if anybody was convinced he would, he'd probably be signed at this point.
Yeah. Sorry, I just someone's at my front door. I got a ring. I don't know if I should say the company. I got a notification from the doorbell on my phone. I was like, who's this guy? I think that's probably it for basketball.
Yeah,
for
there's
today,
not, just not.
10 minutes of birds talk.
The only
How are we
other
feeling
guy,
about the season?
The only other guy, I will never completely give up Dennis Smith Jr. Fits not at all.
Oh, that's Devon's guy.
Does not fit at all. Way too short to play next to Maxey. I had so much interest in him coming out of college. Such an incredible athlete. Had so much speed coming off that pick and roll. It just has not worked out. But I will never completely give him up. He's had some injury problems too, right? I think that's been part of it.
Yeah, I mean, he's had multiple knee injuries, I believe. And he also, early in his career, it wasn't just that he was a bad shooter. It's that he was messing with his mechanics and like totally screwed up his shot.
He's still a bad shooter, to be clear.
He is not a good shooter. But I think he's at least now his attempts coming out of college were at least like, okay, he's not shooting the ball well, but he's getting up like 5 a game in Dallas. He's cratered big time since then. Granted, in a much smaller opportunity than he had as a rookie, who they were still figuring things out in Dallas. But
no interest in him on this team, but I'm still interested. Like I said, he's just the one guy
hope he gets a shot
never be able to give up. All right, Bird's thoughts.
I hope they win. I hope they win every game by 30 points. I hope that somehow. Here's what I would say, and obviously Bo and Zach and the rest of the guys who do this day to day know more than me. On the field, I'm not even like that. I don't have many concerns. I think there's some stuff on defense that the linebacker group is always a little bit lacking because they don't spend money there. Although we'll see what Nakobe Dean does now that he's been given this starting nod. But I'm not worried about personnel. The big thing for me, and I know fans, poo-pooed, like, why is this being reported on now during training camp and whatnot? Do Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni like each other enough to get through a season successfully? And I'm not saying they have to be they don't have to have the perfect relationship.
Shaq
right?
and Kobe didn't have a perfect relationship.
We've seen plenty of examples throughout sports, across different sports, where people who achieve at a high level together don't need to be absolutely in lockstep at all times, on or off the court, field, ice, whatever it is, to win at a high level. Now, that being said, I think when you completely melt down to the degree they did organizationally last year, when you're making clear panic moves like bumping Matt Patricia to defensive coordinator, despite it was very funny because he's on the other side of the greatest Eagles win in franchise history and has not really shown anything to me over his career that he's a good defensive guy. You promote him in a time of crisis and you make the crisis worse. It was clear they were grasping at straws for a lot of the last, I don't know, let's call it 5-6 weeks. I don't know. It felt like 3 months they were in a tailspin, but I don't know if that was actually the case. Anyway, I think the most important thing is the head coach and the quarterback have to be on the same page on some level. There has to be a functional working relationship. And I do think from what we've heard, there have been steps taken to mend fences and kind of get back there. I think part of it was whose story? It was Tim McManus and Jeremy Fowler at ESPN was the story that they went into it. I think a lot of people skipped over because there was the stuff from last season and everyone's like, oh, that's clickbait. Why are we bringing this up? I think the important part of that article was what we heard about, hey, here's how Nick Sirianni is changing his day-to-day demeanor, how he's communicating, doing different things in order to reach people like Jalen Hurts more than he did at the end of last season. And so we'll see. Obviously, at the top end, the talent is insane, right? Like if Hurts has a bounce back year, he wasn't terrible last year, but was not as good as the year prior. A.J. Brown is great. Devontae Smith is great. Saquon gives them a new dimension in the backfield. They should be able to put up points on basically anyone. So I'm looking more at, are they harmonious enough to win at the level that everyone expects them to?
Yeah. And like you mentioned, you don't have to be best friends. Like even Woody and Buzz got under each other's skin, but they brought it home in Toy Story, and you just need to have a working relationship.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with everything that you said. I'm really interested in the Saquon aspect of this, in part because I've always just had a thing for running backs. I think they're incredibly fun to watch. I understand the hesitation to invest any real resources.
Barry Sanders is my favorite player ever.
Yeah, no,
That's who I grew up
very
loving.
frequently some of the most enjoyable players for me to watch, even if, like I said, I understand the rationale behind not investing a lot in them. And this is just a player, at an age where I don't think he's going to start declining, but like there's a risk, and a archetype that the Eagles have generally stayed away from. How can they integrate that into what they do? How much does he have left? There's a personal connection. My brother actually went to school with Saquon up in the Whitehall area. So I'm also interested because of that. I just think it's a fascinating dynamic and something that we don't really get a chance to watch all that often with this football team. And I mean, to your point, just, what is Hurts? How does he bounce back from not only from a tougher than expected season last year, but from a lot more criticism than I think he was expecting, and that I think anyone was quite frankly expecting it'll be. Look, I expect big things from this.
Yeah.
What was your prediction?
I didn't even end up making
I didn't
one.
make one either.
Look, I don't even get into all that. I think they should win the division is where I'm at. Whatever that takes, it's what it takes. And because if you try to do the record, you get some of these games because they extended the schedule. And now it's like you have a game or two at the end of the year that doesn't really matter. You just sit everybody. I honestly think one of the crimes of the NFL, and I get why they did it, all these people have to pay for preseason tickets to get season tickets. And none of the guys play who actually matter. It's like, there are some roster battles that play out, and it's not everybody sits, but all the guys who are like the people you actually want to see don't play in the preseason. And I'm not saying you never really learned anything from the preseason to begin with, but from a consumer standpoint, that has not meshed well with me. But here's what I would say. Biggest concern outside of the personality, coaching, whatever that led with here. After watching Ravens Chiefs and seeing all the illegal formation calls on the line of scrimmage, I have my eye on Lane Johnson for at least the first few weeks as they do their point of emphasis thing that leagues tend to do to start the year. Lane is an incredible, probably future Hall of Fame type of player.
I think no doubt about it.
Yeah, he's been great, but there is a little bit of like straddling that line between breaking the rules and bending the rules. And so we'll see how he's impacted by that. We'll see how, replacing Kelsey goes over. They've obviously shifted some things there. And if the Eagles have said anything with how they build teams over the last 2+ decades, the trenches matter, right? Yep. They invest in it. They care about it. And so when you take Jason Kelsey, a future Hall of Famer, out and move some pieces around, what happens from there? So I'm excited to see how the season starts, and I'm excited to see the Eagles win the stinking Super Bowl.
Trenches matter, except for that couple-year period with Chip. He seemed to abandon the trenches for a mystifying reason.
Which was weird because he said big people beat up little people, and he literally drafted Lane Johnson, first pick ever. And
then ignored the offensive line the rest of his time. One of the many problems with Chip in that era. But I'm very excited to have something
Darkness,
to go.
I am not repeating that comment. Just know that
Honestly,
I'm laughing internally.
Most of Darkness's comments you can't repeat,
That's probably
but we
true.
Appreciate a good chunk of them.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today on a day when I know all of you really only care about the birds. Show up to Tradesman's tonight. Get your tickets, $40, all-you-can-eat buffet, 3-drink tickets, hang out with the crew, see the live show. You will enjoy yourselves. If you don't, you'll still enjoy yourselves at home. Thank you for being here with us, as always. Thank you to my girl, Winona. Thank you to Dave Dewar. Darkness in the building. Thank you to Eugene Ross, the Comcast King. Thank you to Mr. Sandman, Money Mar. You better love somebody in the building. Goya John in the building. Sean Ford in the building, who's still pining after Denny Avdia, buddy. So are we. Thank you to Valhos. Thank you to Alex Perry. Gavini was in here, said first time in a while. Thanks for showing up, my friend. Thank you to Keith B., Neil Deaver, Jay of the Jungle. Thank you, everyone. And by the way, remember, if you are drinking some adult beverages for the Eagles game tonight, if you're out for any other reason, do not drink and drive. Call an Uber, take the subway, have a DD, do whatever you need to do to watch the Eagles, have some fun, and get home safe. Take your Z-Biotics pre-alcohol, too. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the bell icon so you get notifications each and every time we go live. Hit the thumbs up on the way out. Thank you, Bree.
We all silly like the mayor.